Well, hello, sports fans. Larry Eater, RunBlogRun. It's a rainy day in San Jose, and we are now talking with Stuart Muir, who is in Oxford, England, the intellectual capital of the world. Greetings, Stuart.
Hello.
This is our Athletics Chat 74. So for 74 weeks, poor Stuart has had to chat with me on a Monday or Tuesday about pressing issues in the sport. We've solved many problems. Probably made a few too.
I mean, I'm just disappointed that we haven't been invited to Glasgow to solve global warming.
You know, I think you and I could have done that over a couple of nice glasses of wine, you know? I think we would have gotten people just to, give each other little hugs or something, I don't know.
Yeah.
That was, and I like Glasgow. I loved being there for the Commonwealth Games in 14. That was a blast. Okay, so today we're going to talk about, first thing is discussion of the British model of funding athletes through world-class program. And I'm going to chat a little bit about what they do on the U.S. side. So I'm going to let you start with this, kind sir, and I'll chime in.
Well, the two biggest difference, I think, with our situation is, first of all, we do not have any sports scholarships at colleges and universities. So you take someone like Dina Asher-Smith, who did a degree in history at King's College London. She was treated just like a normal student who had her lectures when it suited the history department, and she did her training in the evening. And that is the model, normally. Slightly different at Loughborough, which is a sports university, a technical university, and it's where British Athletics locates quite a number of its coaches. But, we've just announced in the last week or two that 67 Olympic athletes and 42 Paralympic athletes have been funded for the next year. And the level of funding comes in at different levels, but it's up to $38,000 a year. I think it's tax-free. And in addition to that, you get all your medical stuff free, including massage, treatments, etc. And according to your discipline, you get you get the offer of 1 or 2 training camps. I was talking to Kendall Ellis this week, and I asked her, what are your plans for the winter? And she didn't understand the question. But she said, I train in LA, we don't have a winter. But of course, if you're from Britain, then you need to go somewhere for warm weather training. So, for example, a lot of our distance runners would go to South Africa in December, sprinters as well in December or January, Florida in April, and the distance runners would go somewhere like the Alps, Font-Romeu. So all of that is paid for if you're on the world-class program. In fact, one athlete said to me, having just come off the program, that the money is a disappointment, but I can find money. The problem is that I've lost the therapist who has dealt with me for the last 6 years, and I'm now starting from scratch with a new therapist. So people say that is almost as valuable as the money. So that's the situation. I'll just pause there, and then I'll tell you let you come in with anything, and then we'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages of our system.
Sure. So in the U.S., I'm going to try to give a quick overview. There's about 1.4 million athletes in track and cross country between the ages of 14 and 18, which you would call juniors, that compete for about 23,000 American high schools. Now, some of the schools have better funded programs than others. For the most part, the kids pay for shoes. There's athletic trainers at the public high schools, and at the private schools, there's athletic trainers as well. I coached at community college, which is a 2-year college system in the US, and I did that for 6 years. We had trainers. They had access to us. I mean, I was, as the assistant coach and the head coach, we were there from 9 till 6 every day. Close to, this was from September till June, and then we were still even around during the summers if the athletes needed it. They had athletic trainers, a really great training program at Foothill College. I coached Division I for 2 years. Division I is the height of the American university system. There's about 2,500 colleges in the U.S. that compete in track and cross country. And it's very different at different schools. For example, at the school I went to, Santa Clara University, when I was there, the tuition was $3,500 a year. I was on a full academic scholarship, and I had that for 4.5 years. And then I got my first athletic scholarship, which paid for a third of my tuition. But my academics, as long as I kept a 3.0, my entire tuition was paid for. Now it's $40,000 to $50,000 a year at Santa Clara, and another $20,000 for room and board. And the way I believe the program is set up, they have a cross-country program and a track program based almost on a club system. But they take, I believe they have 4 scholarships for men and for women, and they split them up in cross-country and track. At schools like the University of Arkansas, they would break scholarships up. But at the big schools, you've got trainers. I mean, what was nice for me at Santa Clara and what continues going on is they had a fantastic athletic training system. And a lot of the colleges, you either get a discount on shoes or you get free shoes and free, track suits and things like that. And you go from about 1.4 million in high schools to a little less than about 60,000 at the college, community college and club level. When you get out of college, you're talking, those numbers go down pretty drastically to about 4,000 athletes. And it's very disparate the way they're taken care of. The majority of athletes, and there's probably 1,000 of them, if they make between $30,000 and $60,000 a year, they're quite lucky. It's a very small group of athletes that make a little bit more. USA Track and Field takes care of a group of athletes because of their deal with Nike, where they supply them with footwear, they supply them with apparel, they help with some of the training. It goes from $5,000 a year in terms of grants to about $40,000, but most of the top athletes are taken care of by a footwear brand. And the majority of that is Nike, Adi, over here now Puma, On Running has groups. Most of the running shoes that are based on distance running, Reebok, On, Brooks, have their clubs. Adi and Nike have the most clubs, and they do about 70% of the support of athletes over here. But an athlete that's making over $100,000 is few and far between. And there's huge changes going on right now in the view of sports marketing, especially at Nike. And there's rumors of all kinds of things changing. The way that it's been explained to me in my observations, because it's you can't get an interview with a Nike executive. They just don't do that anymore. The Nike is looking for athletes that have a social impact as well. And there's, like, for example, Shalane Flanagan. Shalane's running 6 marathons in 6 weeks. She's done phenomenal. If you look at what's being done to support her, I estimate they're spending $100,000, $150,000 on this whole promotion. And is it getting them the numbers? It's getting them numbers. Now, how does that help the sport? That's the question. For a long time, I think athletes thought that all they needed to do was run and everything would be copacetic, especially in the 90s. I mean, I remember athletes who were getting six figures, few seven figures, who would not show up for press conferences. And I never understood that. The athletes today, the Brits and the Americans and most of the Europeans are, as you know, perfectly happy working with us to do an interview. In fact, they will go out of their way to work with us. We don't have government support. The way USA Track and Field is supported is they're getting somewhere close to 40 million a year from Nike. They're getting close to 7 to 8 million, it sounds like, from the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, and that's based on how many medals they do at the last Olympics. Track and field, swimming, and gymnastics are the big three over here, and they're the ones that are funded the best. And that funding helps keep USA Track and Field going. My preference would be USA Track and Field be a little more forthcoming in conversations and updates. They did put on some meets this year. They did help Paul Doyle with some things. They obviously, people can do more. I think your system is a good system, a very good system. I wish they would consider something like that, but at this time they don't. They've got something where the brands put a lot into the sport. USATF does training camps or does camps around championships. They help get them to events when you've qualified for their teams. And all I hear from the athletes is pretty tremendous. This year was a little strange because there was no training camp in Tokyo, and I believe it severely affected many of the athletes. I think it cost us medals too. But yeah, it's a different approach. I don't know which is better, but I think that's probably the best way to explain it.
Yeah, absolutely. I find that fascinating. And I mean, the whole concept to see if the college coach hardly exists with us. I mean, like I have written about Andy Young coaching Lauren Muir when she was at Glasgow University, but Andy would have been a volunteer coach in that role. He wasn't employed by the university to do it. And then obviously he stuck with it, he's become successful, and so on. And of course, we do not have the kind of competition between colleges that you have. You know, Dina Axel-Smith will never, literally never, if at all, have run for her university. But just to mention one other thing is that, of course, you mentioned shoe contracts and things like that. Those are open to our athletes as well. And what British Athletics says, which I think is reasonable, if your overall income is $85,000 and above, then you begin to lose some of your funding, because basically they say you don't really need it if you've got that kind of income coming from elsewhere. And the advantage of the system is that if you are an athlete with talent and you are going to university, you're paying your fees at university, you may not be able to afford a car to get you to practice, and your practice is probably not going to be at the university. And so the funding is a help. The funding enables people to be full-time athletes and not just to be training in the evening. The negative which I've heard, which is quite an interesting one, is that if you give a 19-year-old that amount of money, there is the danger of them thinking they've made it. And I won't name any names, but I remember one of our top athletes being on a training camp in Florida with a lot of young athletes. And this experienced athlete would do her work, and then she would come back and rest. And she was sort of sharing apartments with young, perhaps 19-year-old British athletes on this Sunday, who would do their training and then be off to the nearest shopping mall. And the older athlete tried to explain to them that really, if you're going to take your track seriously, you've got to do your workout, and then you've got to rest, and you've got to hydrate, and you've got to eat, and all the rest of it. And there certainly have been cases of people getting the funding and never actually making any progress and feeling that they've made it. And I mean, if you take someone like Christian Horrody, who will tell you that when she was at university, she was training in the evenings and she was doing a part-time job to help finance herself. And she would say that developed her character in a way that perhaps the 19-year-old who suddenly gets a check for $38,000 doesn't have to, and therefore doesn't learn those life skills. So, you know, that's the only negative on that I've heard on this. I mean, this year has been a very odd year because the performance director who was responsible for deciding who would get the funding had gone 2 days after the announcement. And certainly there were questions about certain people not getting funding, being taken off funding. And it is quite an arbitrary thing. The money, by the way, comes from it comes from a body called UK Sport, which gets it from the National Lottery. And they have a certain pot for potential Olympic medals across all sports. And they set medal targets, and you know, you can increase your funding to the next cycle or lose some funding to the next cycle according to whether you meet your medal targets. So, you know, after Paris, there could be more or there could be less athletes funded. But the funding is ring-fenced and can only be used to fund athletes in this way. The other thing that some athletes have said is that if you accept the funding, you accept a certain amount of control over your program. For example, if you're in the relay program, you'll be expected to do 1 or 2 relay tasks. And if British Athletics decide they're going to put a team in the 10 relays, you've got to be there. Even though you might be thinking, well, actually, I would rather be training that week rather than going and competing. So you know, there's no such thing as a free lunch, as they say. And so if you take the money, there are certain conditions attached to it. So I think it has served us well. It has generally worked well. You know, there are 109 athletes who are now professional full-time athletes because of this funding that might not otherwise be.
Well, I'm going to add a little bit to when you're talking about Andy Young being a volunteer. So I coached American high school for, was it 9 or 10 years? When I was competing, they were going to pay me somewhere around $500 a season. I had them just give me a shoe credit because the NCAA at the time did not allow me to be paid for coaching because I'd be considered a professional. When I coached community college, I made $3,500 a year. If I'd had a master's degree and was the head coach at the time, it'd have been somewhere around 65,000 US. I was a finalist for a couple assistant coaching positions in the last 8 or 10 years, and that would have been from September till June, and the pay was somewhere between $50,000 and $75,000 a year. Not bad for part-time work. There's coaches, track coaches in the U.S. at some of the big universities that are paid over $600,000 a year. And the majority of athletes, for a long, long time, the majority of athletes came from that 18 to 22-year-old group right in college or right out of college. What has been happening recently is that many of the top stars, Cindy McLaughlin, for example, Allison Felix, don't compete for the universities. And like Allison, they finish school, but they're with their sponsor, and they're sponsoring them figure out who's going to coach them. In the U.S., so many of the college coaches help these athletes make it on to Olympic teams. There's no real compensation for that. And the U.S. OPC and USATF really have to rely on these coaches. What's frustrating for me is how many of these top coaches are not recognized by USATF in terms of their support for these athletes. They end up working for other countries. And as you know, there's tons of athletes in the U.S. Competing for U.S. colleges. They get, full rides, meals, things like that. And then they go and compete for their country during the Olympics, which is their prerogative. So I see the U.S. as this melting pot of developing coaches. The volunteer coach, there's coaches like when Michael Johnson was competing, he had Clyde Hart, and Clyde was his college coach, and Michael compensated Clyde after he finished college to coach him. And so there's professional coaches out there too, Raina Ryder, Lance Brauman, who are supported by brands to take care of the brand's athletes. Nike has many coaches like that too. So it's a very interesting kind of convoluted way of doing things over here. And it's in many cases, we don't have the longevity of that relationship between an athlete and a coach that you have in Europe. That's what I think has been one of our weaknesses. A lot of times kids have an American at 25 has probably had a coach in high school, at least one coach in college, and a coach as a professional. Now we're seeing more and more athletes make it into their late 20s, early 30s. Virtually all the brands have a thing where if you have a good year, of course, you're making good money. If you have a bad year, they take money away from you. And it's how do you survive if you don't know what you're getting? I mean, it's a very challenging program, and there's a lot of stress, I think, involved in it. Do the athletes love it? Sure, of course they love it when they're at the top of their form. But when they're having a tough time, being with a brand that says, hey, you know what, we're going to stick with you, that's a big deal, And to the credit of most of the brands during the pandemic, brands like Adi, Puma, New Balance, Brooks stayed with their people. Nike did with some as well. But there were a lot of people who were let go during this time. And they don't have the that level of support that I like what British Athletics does, where it says if you're making over 85 a year, we're going to have to cut some stuff back. That makes sense, because then share it with the people who don't have that money, I think that's really key.
Yeah. Now, I was just thinking when you talked about longevity of coaches, I mean, if you take our medal winners in Tokyo, Laura Muir has been with Andy Young all through her career, because I mean, she went to university at 18, had no thought of being a professional athlete at that stage, and started being coached by Andy, started making progress, and she started to take her athletics more seriously, and now she's a full-time professional athlete and a qualified vet, and she's still with Andy. Dean Smith met John Blackie when she was, I think, 8 or 9 years old, and she's still there. Christina Horrogly, virtually her entire career was coached by the now late Lloyd Cowan. Now, there have been athletes who changed. For example, Daryl Nika and Jasmine Sawyers have both come to America in the last couple of years for a specific coach. And Katrina Johnson Thompson left her long-term coach to go and work in France. But the coach's name escapes me, who's just been made the French national coaching director or something like that. So she's now looking for a third coach. But I mean, you're right, that for a lot of athletes, with us, I mean, Holly Bradshaw, another of our medalists in Tokyo, has been with Scott Simpson. Initially, Scott was her assistant coach working with Dan Platt. But you know, she and Scott have been together virtually all through her career. So we do have that. We do have that situation.
Do you think that under Mark Monroe that there will be a revisiting of this world-class program for this year?
Remember that Mark has just been appointed for 6 months, although there is speculation that he will be a very serious candidate long term. But there is, in theory, the opportunity for athletes to appeal. But it's quite difficult if you've given money to an athlete to take it away. So therefore, if you allow an unsuccessful athlete to appeal, then you've got to find the money from somewhere. I mean, I know of 2 athletes who've told me that they are considering an appeal because they're questioning the manner in which the decision was made. The problem with, if I were to ask you, Larry, to name 10 American athletes who are going to win medals in Paris, it'd be fascinating to see when Paris comes how many of your 10 do. And see, that is the process. You're asking now the performance director and the head coach at British Athletics to choose the people that they think are going to win medals in Paris. And sometimes they'll get it right, sometimes they'll get it wrong. Sometimes athletes who are not on the funding will develop later. And it's always a bit of fun at our national championship when a non-funded athlete beats the funded athletes. Because, just because you are funded doesn't give you a divine right, to finish in the top 2 at the trials. So it's quite difficult to appeal unless you've actually got some evidence of something being wrong in the process, because it's basically the coaching staff choosing the people that they think are most likely to win medals next time and putting the funding behind it. So and I mean, how do you deal with an athlete? Well, I'll give you one example. Lavia Nielsen was our top 400 runner, and she had a really bad season last season. I don't know why she had a bad season, but she didn't make the individual. And while she was in Tokyo, from memory, she didn't actually run in the relay. But she has been kept on funding. And somebody has obviously said, look, she had a bad season, but she had very good, 3 or 4 very good seasons before that. So based on her potential, we're going to continue funding her. But equally, if someone had said, no, we're taking you off funding because look, you didn't come in the top 3 in the trial, so we're giving the money to someone else. I don't think you could have argued with that. So it is subjective. It's a value judgment as to which 68 athletes should we invest in order to maximize the number of athletes reaching finals and winning medals in Paris.
Yeah, no, it's you're right. You know, it's if you take the time right now and kind of look at the crystal ball, it's a lot of juggling. I was most surprised by your group that they did nothing for the men's 4x4. And that just showed me that Miss Symington just did not appreciate the nuances of track and field. And I always get into this place where someone always they do it over here too. They try to reinvent the wheel. And they, there's that American phrase, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But Americans are the worst about it because when someone new comes in, they always have to fire people and take the people who are doing well. For once, I'd love to see someone say, you know what? This person wasn't on my dream list, but they've been doing a great job, and I'm going to let them the heck alone. Consistency is such a big thing with runners, and track and field athletes are creatures of habit. If you're reinforcing the neuromuscular loop, as they say, or training, you're putting stresses on your body. You're doing repetitive motions that when the going gets tough, you're able to do. Like Valerie Allman in the discus in Tokyo, Coach Zion worked with her to bust out with her best throw first. And as you and I both know, it started pouring. It was absolutely torrential. And no one was able to get their stuff together. She slipped on a later throw. And Sandra Perkovic, came oh so close to medaling. And I believe it was because of the weather,
Excuse me, you say that we both know what the weather was like. I think you were sitting in the sunshine in California. I was actually there getting my butt wet in Tokyo.
You were getting your butt wet, and I was feeling sympathetic for you. Let's be very true. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. You had to deal with that, my friend. It was just quite humid here, so nothing like what you had. So athletes have to prepare for all things, and consistency in training, consistency with coaching, consistency with the experience are all the things that are key. The joke that you made about talking to Kendall, and she said, well, I'm in LA, and it's true. There's so many athletes who train in the Los Angeles area, in San Diego, because they have that great weather all year long and they can be prepared for it. So nothing's really going to surprise them. The difference is that USATF and British Athletics have one goal, which is to get as many medals as they can for their country in international competitions. That's the only thing USATF is supposed to do. It's not supposed to develop people being happy joggers, but they do. Doing other things, but they do. Yeah, that's what you guys do with British Athletics too. So much USATF gets by luck because of our collegiate track program. It has nothing to do with their planning. It has nothing to do with the USOC building a university. I mean, to do a great track facility, you're talking $3 to $5 million at least, and then what if you have your own track stadium? I know when Vin Lanano was at Stanford, he brought in sponsors for Angel Field, the Cobb Stadium. I mean, the whole 9 yards. It's a beautiful facility, but boy, did it cost bucks, and but you have places like that, those sanctuaries of sport. So there's so much out of the realm of the world class program or sponsorship in the U.S. And there's a lot of luck involved with it. It's a challenge.
Let me mention two things before you tell me that we're about to run out of time. You mentioned Sarah Symington. Well, the job description and job details for her successor have been announced today. And the post is changing from performance director to technical director, brackets performance. And the job has been changed a bit, one might say, to avoid the mistakes of the past, saying that the successful candidate should have extensive performance knowledge and technical expertise in track and field. So we're not now looking for somebody like Sarah, who had extensive experience in netball and archery and a bit of cycling. We're looking for somebody from within the sport, which I think a lot of people will think is the right way to go. And the other thing I want to mention is that we have just released a UK-wide coaching strategy for athletics. This is a 24-page document attempting to improve the quality of coaching. We haven't time really to talk in detail, but both the job description that I mentioned and the UK-wide coaching strategy are on the British Athletics website and are downloadable.
Okay, then I will get those and link to them. Okay.
And so far, the reaction to the coaching strategy has been welcomed, and the fact that really people have sat down and looked at the development of coaches, whether there's a career structure for coaches, who coaches are responsible to in one sense, but also who is there to help them, who is there to support coaches. Valuing coaches as people is a phrase that I picked out in there.
Oh, nice. That's an interesting concept. I like that. So do you think as we wind this one down, number 74, do you think that British Athletics is going in the right direction?
I think it's going in the right direction, but I think that many people within the sport feel that the last year has been quite damaging and that we've lost people like Stephen Maguire and Terry Alexander, etc. And, it would have been better if they were both still there. And so that when Mark Munro or his successor sits down at their desk and looks at their in-tray, there's an awful lot of stuff to be put right before they can start changing and building the future. So I think it's going to be a very busy time, and as we've commented in the past, we have not had a CEO in post for more than 18 months. Going back to 2017, we've had a series of temporary ones. Joe Coates going after just over 18 months is the longest we've been there. And so we're really looking for a period of stability. I think there's a lot of positivity towards Ian Beattie as a man of the sport and Mark as a man of the sport. So yeah, I'm positive. I'm positive and looking forward.
Well, that's a nice way to end Athletics Chat 74, my friend. Thank you again for reaching out today, and I hope you have a lovely evening in the intellectual capital of the world, Oxford, England. This is Larry Eder with RunBlogRun, signing off for Stuart Weir and myself. This is Athletics Chat 74. We thank you for listening to our diatribes, and we thank Mike Deering, our production manager, for not jumping out windows and dealing with us for 74 weeks. Be good. Well, hello, sports fans. Larry Eder, RunBlogRun. Stuart Weir was with us. He's in Oxford, England, the intellectual capital of the world. And we remind John Ridgen of that every week, just so you know. And this is Athletics Chat 73, the epilogue. Our Larry's monologue, as Mike calls it, another convo with Larry. It's where I talk into the mirror and say, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? But today we're talking about the challenges of British athletics. At the end of last week, Joe Coates, CEO, 18 months, and Sarah Symington, the director of performance, both with no experience in track and field, have resigned. During their tenure, there were some things that Stuart thought that Joe did fairly well. There was some massive screw-ups by Ms. Symington. And it wasn't that her heart wasn't in the right place. We obviously don't know where her heart is, but what was strange was that not only did she seem to have no knowledge of track and field, but we're not sure who she used for advice. And when she resigned, within a very short period of time, I believe someone told me 15 minutes, another one person told me an hour, there was a tweet that said she'd taken a job at British Cycling and she couldn't be happier. Yet several days beforehand, she had not included stalwarts like Andy Butchert, Tom Bosworth, the men's 4x4 in the WCP program. And a couple media pundits referred to Sarah Symington's "couldn't be happier" is the most inappropriate tweet of all times. I'm not sure it's the most inappropriate, but I would put it in my top 5. And I will, maybe that's one of the things we can do is for a little award at the end of the year, Joe Coates over the last 18 months provided some thoughtful leadership in terms of protecting athletes and setting up some various structures, but she also let go or didn't support a whole cadre of fine British coaches, technical people, and probably the one I really don't think she ever recovered from is letting Cherry Alexander go. It was a total screw up. There was no one there to run the meets. And during their tenure, number of BBC shows dropped, the number of meets in the UK dropped, and they didn't do a Diamond League meet, which was insane. The UK is one of the birthplaces of track and field. And if it doesn't have a Diamond League meet, or when Pascoe and Ridgen and Stewart were there, they had 2, and they had the meets indoors, and I flew over every season to see all of them because I wanted to see how great meets were done. And without Cherry and the team there, that was just rubbish. Sarah Symington, again, she was the director of performance. I'm not sure she knew the athletes or the coaches well enough to do that. Is the world-class program the right way to fund? I think it's a great way to fund. It's different than what the U.S. does. We rely more on individual sponsorships, and then there's obviously help that USATF does for athletes. But the difference between USATF and British Athletics is this. Max Siegel has the support of leadership at all the sponsors. He's done his homework. USA is winning medals and is either 1 or 2 in the Olympic medal food chain, and that makes the US OPC very happy. And there's a lot of money there. And I believe Max and the team in Indy feel that a lot of times no news is good news. And I can understand that because when you don't say anything, you don't get in trouble. But we've got a World Championships coming up. We've got a US Championships coming up. And this is the first Worlds in the US. And your biggest sponsor, Nike, is putting gazillions into it. So someone needs to manage it and run it. And it'd be really nice if we got a little news every week on what's going on. But I've digressed. But the difference between USA Track and Field and British Athletics is USA Track and Field is bringing in medals, bringing in money, and keeping their mouth shut, which is what a lot of corporate America sees. I kind of disagree with that. British Athletics is losing money, losing events, losing some of their coaches, and pissing off the people that they claim that they're there to support. Mark Monroe coming in from Scottish Athletics. Mark has a great reputation. Laura Muir, who I think is a very straight shooter, wrote a very kind social media post about Mark and the confidence. And another pundit told Stuart Weir that he believes that within 4 to 5 years, Mark could be the next CEO of British Athletics. And we'll have to see. I think that could be very, very cool. You need someone in there who knows how to run the show and knows how to run corporately. Obviously, Ian Beattie, the CEO of UK Athletics, a man who has run a financial or a legal business with billings, we understand, of about 30 million. So he does know how to run a business. He's a runner. He's put on races. He's competed in races, so he gets it. His first board meeting, and after that, Coates and Symington resigned. Well, a lot of times 2 + 2 is 4. And in corporate dealings, and I've dealt with that for most of my adult life, when a change happens that quick, someone is back there pulling the marionette strings. And I congratulate Mr. Beattie on coming in, finding the problem, or what he assesses a problem, and clearing it out. There'll be some short-time pain, but it's good for the athletes and good for the sport and good for British Athletics. Beattie and Mark Monroe, I think, could be very interesting. We'll be observing it. And this is Larry Eder with RunBlogRun. This is the epilogue of Athletics Chat 73, where we talked about British Athletics imploding. Thank you.